There's a button, there's a light. Testing. I do apologize for the last-minute substitution. I have spent most of the week reviewing videos for my class next Wednesday and for this winter quarter, on truth and evidence is why the Bible is true and the doctrine of the world, specifically scientific materialism or evolution, is not true. And there are scientific reasons to believe that. So when we open the Bible, if you start out at the beginning, you're going to start out with Genesis. Let me give you a brief review of the book of Genesis. If you happen to want to turn there, that would be a good thing. Genesis 1 starts out with a verse, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning one day." I always found it interesting that if you studied physics, I, for a brief while, was a physics major in college before I decided never mind. Life happens and you change your majors. I've been a physics major and an art major and a math major, and so. But one of the things you learn in physics is, Einstein's equation E equals mc squared, which means energy is the same thing as matter if you sort of take it apart. Like an atomic bomb, that's what it does, is it smashes radioactive uranium or something like that, and releases a lot of energy because it sort of destroys the matter. But I always found it interesting that light was the first thing God created. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning a second day. The word heaven has three different meanings. The first meaning, and this is sometimes why later in the New Testament it says that Paul says that he knew of a man who was called up into the third heaven. But the first heaven is the air that we breathe. It's the sky that the birds fly in. That's called the heavens sometimes. The second heaven is the space that the sun, moon, and stars reside in. And the third heaven is wherever God is, which we usually consider a little bit outside of our universe. But we always consider it to be in an up direction rather than a down direction, because the down direction under the earth is also a euphemism for the place of the dead. Hades or Sheol is considered to be under the earth. And there are verses that says that in the end, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord, both in heaven and on earth and under the earth. And they're talking about the people who are dead when they say under the earth. Verse 9 in Genesis 1 says, "Then God said, let the waters below the heavens..." Oh, I already read that, didn't I? No. "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. This one verse that says, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, has been used by some people who believe this to say that before the flood, all of the land was also in one place. And if you look at a globe and you take those little pieces of continents or look at a map, you will see that North America and South America sort of fit into, where Europe and Africa kind of fit. It looks like a puzzle almost. And some people have connected that, and one person who was a geologist said, what if when the fountains of the deep broke open, it actually split that land apart? And there is evidence for that because in the middle of the oceans, you have these big mountain ridges. They're chains of mountains caused by volcanoes. And there is some evidence that those volcanoes might have, pushed the oceans up onto the land. Anyway, verse 11 says, God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them, and it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. We know now that everything living is built out of little cells, which are microscopic. You can't even show how small they are. And each one of those cells kind of has a boundary on it. And some cells have what we call nuclei, or a little teeny kind of a heart of the cell thing, which has things in it that don't exist outside of the nuclei. And this is something that I will be showing you pictures of on Wednesdays, is, some of the machines inside the cells, of which there are many hundreds that operate and do all kinds of functions inside the cell. And some people have said that those machines are what we would call irreducibly complex. That is, they could not have happened or have come into being from a process of slow and gradual changes. That is, they had to have been built all at once for them to work. And this is kind of one argument for, I guess you would say, intelligent design, is that the things inside each cell work together to do what the cell needs to do as far as dividing and providing food, energy, and handfuls of other things that I don't even remember sometimes. Inside each cell of a living organism is what we would call DNA, and that was discovered in 1956, the structure of it, and since then people have discovered the inside each DNA strand are about 3 billion little pieces of chemicals which form like words and sentences and strings of things which get copied and built into proteins inside the cell. And the odd thing is that those strings are, I don't know what you call them, overlapping. Because when it copies some of the strings to make a protein, it can also copy part of that string into another protein and another part of that string into another protein. So the things it's like a computer program where the code is so complicated that each piece of code does multiple things. And this is something that usually, as a programmer, you would never do, is write code that modifies itself. You know, I suggested that to a teacher once when we were doing assembly language in school, and she looked at me like I had stepped in something very smelly and said, no, you never do that. And one of the reasons you don't is because if you do that, you can never figure out what's wrong with it if it doesn't work. You know, if you start modifying the code itself. But inside each cell, that DNA strand gets copied, and each section of it gets copied into different things that can create many different proteins which do many different functions inside the cell. It's very complicated. Where were we? Verse 14. Then God said that let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth and to govern the day and the night and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. I taught Sunday morning class many years ago, and I had a magazine which was on the subject of astronomy, and one of the articles in the magazine was saying as to how, in their opinion, in the history of the universe, the suns that exist in our universe did not sort of turn on until half the time of the universe was already gone, so to speak. And I found it interesting that here God waits till the fourth day to create the sun, moon, and the stars and to give light to everything, instead of doing this, for example, on the first day. You know, but that sort of gave credence to the idea that the science, that the astronomers were saying, was that suns didn't really start shining until, you know, halfway through the universe's age or something like that. This is also interesting because having the sun, moon, and the stars created on the fourth day instead of the second day, for example, he created the sun, moon, and stars the day after he created the plants. So you can't say that all of the plants evolved for millions of years in the dark with no sun, moon, and stars. It would be kind of not, it wouldn't work right, okay? But if you just have from one day to the next, then it sort of works. Ben?
Suggested evolution. I'll repeat that. The systems that seem to be in existence in us and plants are so complicated that there is no real way for it to evolve. And in the description of the third day, the plants do after their own kind. That is, you don't have grass trying to make a pear or an apple tree making tulip flowers. So these things, they, because of the design, can't do something they're not meant to do.
Yeah, he said that things can't do something they're not meant to do after their kind. God creates things to reproduce after their kind, and kind in the Bible is sometimes related to a biology category of family. People have said there's a dog kind, there's a cat kind, there are horse kinds and cow kinds and dogs. Yeah, a lot of dogs. So it's like having different human races. they're different, and we put them in different species sometimes, but they really haven't been able to escape the limits of the kind as God gave them. Verse 20, then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. God created great sea monsters and every creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. There was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. According to the Bible, then, birds are not dinosaurs. They did not come from dinosaurs. They were created first before the land animals. Verse 24, then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. So again, God is saying, there are limits to what a kind of animal can reproduce into. And there are many people who believe in the creation who also say that animals can change in the sense that when DNA gets like a small mutation that might break some little piece of something, it can change like the color of their fur or the size, or I think one book said that blue eyes actually happen because there is a little gene that got a little piece of DNA was lost or mutated so that it didn't have what it took to have brown eyes. So blue eyes are kind of defective as opposed to being the source of everything. Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And we have. There are, something like 8 billion people in the world now. And I think they said there are only so many thousands of like elephants, or there are many, what species, I guess you would call it, types of animals that we would consider bordering on extinction. We, as humans, try to get rid of everything that is dangerous or scary. When I first moved up here in 1960, you could go out in the field about 2 streets over before they built the school there, and you could find, I think we flipped over a piece of plywood one time, and there was a pile of garter snakes that went, like this. And I mean, it was a bundle of these little black, they were this long, slithering all over the place. And I haven't seen any garter snakes in quite a few years now, around here anyway. I saw one up on Powell Butte last year. So I don't know what you call it, the ecosystem, the place where animals can live kind of shrinks and gets narrow, and except for the animals that tolerate us, like raccoons and coyotes, they don't usually hang around people very much. And now we have squirrels and birds and stuff that are all over the place, and you see them running in front of your car and what's left of them after somebody's hit them. One of the reasons we have that is because in the 1960s, a lady named Rachel something, I can't remember what her name, wrote a book called Silent Spring about the effect of DDT, which was killing all of the small animals and the birds and everything. And so they outlawed DDT, and now we have squirrels again. People are the most dangerous thing on earth. Harry, microphone.
Another interesting thing, you're talking about some animals that are either have become extinct or are extinct. There's also all the time that they are discovering new species that we didn't even know existed in places where there aren't a lot of people, in rainforests, jungles, and places like that. And so God's creation for mankind still doesn't even know everything that he has created and what is there, even though there are some animals that aren't here anymore, or there are not as many. There are even more that we don't even know about, which makes it even more incredible as far as that goes.
Yeah, there are new species in the sense that the way we define species, well, biologists try to define species as things that can interbreed with each other. But in that sense, there are almost no new species. But they also categorize species by looking different. And there's, I think, a lake in Africa that they said used to be dry, and now it's not dry, and it's got several thousand of these cichlids, which are fish, of all different kinds of colors and everything, and they've divided them up into all kinds of species, but they're still cichlids. They're still fish. You know, they haven't evolved into anything else. They've just changed their color and their shape a little bit. So verse 29 in Genesis 1 says, "Then God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth, which has life. I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Chapter 2, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. By the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made." Do you ever wonder why we have 7 days in a week? This is why. Because God rested and sanctified it. If you think, for example, that we evolved, then we would have had 5 days in a week, or maybe 10, because that's how many fingers we have. It doesn't make any sense to have 7 days. It's a prime number. It doesn't fit anything. You know, but this is the account of why we have 7 days in a week and why we honor the fact that God rested on one of those days, on the seventh day. Okay, we have 7 or 8 minutes. This is okay. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created on the day that the Lord God made the earth and heaven. Now no shrub of the field was yet in the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprouted, for the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to cultivate the ground. But a mist used to rise from the earth and water the whole surface of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The Lord God planted a garden toward the east in Eden, and there he placed the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God caused to grow every tree that is pleasing to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now I'm going to skip this part because I don't care about the rivers of the gold or anything like that. Then the Lord, verse 15, chapter 2, then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. The Lord God commanded the man, saying, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it you will surely die. Then the Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. Out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called a living creature, that was its name. Now I don't know whether this means that Adam said dog, cat, horse, cow, pig, chicken, or whether he said John, Bill, Harry, Sally, or not. We don't know. Because later in the Psalms it says that God knows the names of every star in the sky. Every. And there are billions of galaxies full of stars, so we can't even imagine being able to name those. The man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field, but for Adam there was not found a helper suitable for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one, I guess this is the first incidence of anesthetic, right? Put you to sleep, operate, wake you up. Anesthesia, not anesthetic. She's correct. Anesthesia. Puts you to sleep. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that place. The Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man and brought her to the man. The man said, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called a woman because she was taken out of man. And this is kind of a play on words. I think in Hebrew something like ish and isha or something like that. For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. This goes all the way back to the beginning, that you have families and marriages. All the way back to the beginning. So families and marriages are something that every culture in the world knows about and has accepted and used. And people sometimes want to ignore that, and they do. But that doesn't mean it wasn't there from the beginning. Chapter 3, now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, as God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden. The woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, you surely will not die, for God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate, and she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loin coverings or girdles. Then they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Then the Lord God called to the man and said to him, where are you? He said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? The man said, the woman whom you gave to me to be with me, she gave me from the tree and I ate. And you kind of laugh at this because it's like, God says, have you done this? And he says, not my fault. The woman you gave me, gave it to me and I ate it. And the man said to the woman, then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me and I ate. And we believe that's true. And the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you will go, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Now, some people misuse this curse, thinking it's the man's right and responsibility to rule over woman. But that isn't what God says. God does not command the man to rule over the woman or to command her. He is just saying this is what's going to happen in the future, and it has happened. And if you happen to live in, let's say, Saudi Arabia or something, women have to be covered up all over the place on pain of death, Then to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you, and in toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread till you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Now, all of this happened way back in the beginning, and if you go to the book of Romans, what it says is that the sin came into the world and death through sin through Adam, not Eve. Adam was the one who knew what he was doing and ate of it and shouldn't have. But because death entered the world, it changed everything. We live in a world which is filled with what the Bible calls corruption, in the sense that there is death and decay and sickness and disease, and it's hard, and everybody dies. And we'll see this in one of these videos. This guy is talking about genetic entropy, which means wearing out and running down. And he says that every time a cell divides, you have about 3 mutations in the DNA. And if you're 60 years old, your skin cells can have up to 40,000 mutations in every cell. And this is why we die, is because of the mutations in the DNA that happen faster or slower, and people end up dying. Nobody that we know of since the time before the flood and shortly after has lived more than 200 years. People die because they wear out their, how do they put it? The DNA kind of rusts like an old car as you live. And the problem is that those DNA mutations, about 100 of them per generation, accumulate every generation. And we'll talk about that on Wednesday sometime. But there are only about 160 to 200 generations between us and Adam, and that's why we're not all dead. If we had been here millions of years, all of those mutations would have killed us. And one geneticist said, why aren't we dead 100 times over? It's because the world isn't that old. quickly.
I was wondering how you determine
Point it right at your face.
when God speaks that it is a commandment or that God is merely stating what's going to happen in the future.
How do you determine if something is a commandment or if it's just a statement about what's going to happen in the future? One of the things you know is, who is he talking to? In this case, he is talking to the woman, not to the man, when he says, your husband will rule over you. He's not telling the husband to command the wife or to rule over the wife. He's telling the wife, this is what's going to happen in general in the world. And it has happened. You can look at the world that we live in and see it. And likewise, you can look at the natural world, you can look at the evidence of geology and astronomy and stuff like that, and it's all pointing to the fact that there is a designer for this universe. Thank you. I hope to see you again on Wednesday.